Hey, everybody. So, not too long ago, I had the opportunity to spend some time on Zoom, as we're all still doing, with Steve Campbell. And Steve is the founder and CEO of Provoke, which is a culture and strategy consultancy based in Portland, Maine. Um, and the reason I wanted to spend a little time with Steve was because his group put together a list of questions that they sent out to CEOs and leaders around the country back towards at the tail end of 2020. Questions that they thought people ought to be thinking about going forward so they can kind of lay out a roadmap for the things they needed to do and think about in 2021. Subsequent to sending out those questions, they've sort of formulated some answers based on the response that they got. Now, I gotta be honest with you, I get a lot of stuff. I have a lot of conversations with consultants all over the country. I don't put very many people like that on Morning Newsbeat. They're very nice people, they're smart people, but I really don't want Morning Newsbeat to become, a place where only where consultants go to be heard. That's not what I see Morning Newsbeat being. That said, Steve is different because Steve comes out of the Ron Hodge School of Management, Ron Hodge School of Leadership. Ron was for many, many years the CEO of Hannaford Brothers up in Maine. And I have to tell you, Ron Hodge guided and started the careers of some amazing people who continue to be extraordinary leaders for a variety of companies. There's Mike Vail, right, at Hannaford. There's Shelley Broader. There's Meg Ham, Cathy Burns, Beth Newlands Campbell, and of course Steve Smith, who's running LL Bean. These are amazing leaders, people for whom I have the utmost respect. And so when Steve Campbell, who comes out of that school, makes observations about management, makes observations about leadership, makes observations about strategy, I tend to pay attention to him and pay attention to his insights. And today, to start the new year, I want to share them with you. Enjoy. So Steve Campbell, Happy New Year. Welcome to Morning Newsbeat.
Hey, Kevin. Good to see you.
So I really wanted to talk to you about this project that you guys embarked on, when there was still a few months left in 2020, the year that we're all so glad to see in the rearview mirror. Because you basically endeavored to pose questions that you thought businesses, retailers specifically, brands needed to answer. And you've sort of, between the companies that you reached out to, the companies you're working with, and also your sort of internal, intelligence, you've sort of developed some answers that are, I think, are relevant. Talk to me a little bit about that process, because I've thought from the very beginning that retailers really needed to hit the ground running. That's a cliche in 2021, and figure out ways to be fundamentally different than they were at the beginning of the pandemic, and to maintain the level of innovation that, even if by accident, that many of them achieved during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, so much of our work is really based in, how do you create good questions for people that allows them to do more, in this example, to do more than just how is everybody today? And getting kind of a cursory answer. So the whole idea of, are there some lightly structured questions that people could pull their leadership teams aside and say, here's what's going on for us right now, here's what's going on in the outside world, and how do we want to be with that? So we put together a handful of questions in like kind of 3 stages. It's where are we right now? Where do we want to be midstream? And then whenever this pandemic gets punctuated somehow, where do we want to be? Do we want to be playing defense? Is there an opportunity for us to experiment with some things during this? And what we saw was, we sent this out to probably 300 different folks. Some people that we work with, some former colleagues that we enjoy, and then just some random stuff. We sent them to the governor of the state of Maine, sent us back a nice note after she received them and played around a little bit. We sent them to the Tampa Bay Rowdies soccer team down in Tampa. So just random, how are people dealing with all this? So that we could get kind of a balcony view of what's going on in the world, and are there ways that we can help? And the responses were incredible. We would get some that were very kind of people that were in triage and trying to manage day to day. We saw other people that were kind of ducking and covering. It's like, it's a third, a third, a third. 1/3 of organizations that we would hear from were trying to be as reactive as they could be and as resilient as they could be. Others were focused on fine-tuning execution. And still others were saying, we need to keep a couple of Lewis and Clarks in the canoe. And we need to have some people looking out beyond whenever this gets better. How do we want to make sure that we're not so much leveraging it, but we're in good health once we get to the other end?
Well, I'm not sure leveraging it. I understand why some people would think that would be an insensitive term, considering more than 300,000 people have died. But I also think that there is it's the Churchill line, right? And you never waste a good crisis, and which I screwed up the quote, but that's basically it. But I do think that retailers, it's been fascinating to me. There's way too many retailers, in my view, who have enjoyed amazing quarters in terms of sales. Profits not necessarily as much because they had to spend more money.
Right.
But they don't recognize the importance of transformation of their businesses for what I don't know about you. I believe that we're going to be in a different world when this is over. If that's not to say we'll never go to the movies again. Yeah. I think we will, but there have been things that have changed that I'm not sure people are going to go back to. Next time you're sitting on a plane and somebody next to you sneezes, what's going to be your reaction? Is it, it's going to be I think a while visceral. In addition, we've all had to learn different skills. None of us knew how to Zoom a year ago. Think about the remote education. This isn't about retailing, but think about what school districts should have learned about remote education. That I don't know how many of them actually learned it. I think a lot of them have just sort of said, well, we'll do that as long as we have to. But in fact, listen, I have a wife and a daughter who are teachers, and they will tell you, hey, there are some kids who actually do better on remote. Yeah. But I don't know that those lessons are being learned. And then to take those same students who have been really good at remote, are they ever going to be shop the way that we shop? Well, probably not.
Yeah. The whole Zoom Teams thing is a real double-edged sword. It's been fascinating to watch because I think there's a wonderful upside to it, and there's also a concerned side to it. The upside that we've seen in some areas is that I don't know if it's the one-dimensional Brady Bunch nature where everybody gets their own space, that we've seen some people that heretofore hadn't been recognized as high potential that will speak up in a Zoom environment, and all of a sudden they're getting noticed. And all of a sudden people are pulling us aside and saying, hey, who was that person on the third box down to the left? And people that didn't have voices because they weren't particularly extroverted in a face-to-face setting are now showing up really big in this kind of setting. The
funny thing about that is everybody's looking at different screens. So the person third down on the left is not the same as for me.
Exactly. Does he mean me? The other thing I think that the shadow side to it is, I think people's sense of belonging gets diluted, regardless of how many Zoom happy hours and shit like that you do. There's a sense of bringing people together, and I sometimes think we overuse the word community. But I think in this sense of people being able to interact, I even think about leadership development and what's happening there is that so much of my career was watching leadership presence that was a generation ahead of me, as opposed to a particular skill or a particular leadership attribute or something like that. I watched how people behaved. I watched how they interact. And that's a different vibe than what you get when you're seeing somebody, in a 2-inch by 2-inch box.
Well, it's interesting. As I said into my introduction, that you come from the Ron Hodge School of, I was going to call it School of Management, but School of Leadership, I actually think is better. And I always thought one of Ron's strengths, it seemed to me, was a sense of connectedness, right?
Yeah.
And so many of you who come out of that school, whether it's Steve Smith now at Ella Bean, or Shelley Broader, or Cathy Burns, or Meg Ham, all of you folks strike me, while being different, are connected people.
Yeah.
within the organizations that you lead or have led. And so I would think for that sort of management style, and connected doesn't mean micromanaging,
Right.
but connectedness is important, I think, for any strong leader, I think.
Yeah. Well, Ron was gifted in a bunch of different ways, but he knew how to bring people together and get them to challenge the heck out of each other's ideas and not challenge each other as people. The humanity never left the room when Ron was there, but the ideas got batted around and everything was fair game. He was also the type of person that when you would bring leaders together, he'd pull me aside, because I would get the good fortune of designing some of these sessions, and he'd pull me aside and say, I really don't care what the topic is. Let's find something juicy, but it's most important for me to see that I'm bringing a group of 100, 150 people together for a day or 2 days. They're going to get a chance to reconnect. They're going to get a chance to talk about more than whatever their most important conversation is in the moment. And they're going to feel like they're, they're given an opportunity to have each other's backs. Another term that gets, thrown around a lot. Truly believe that growing up at Hannaford, that you beat the heck out of each other in meetings, and as far as thinking was concerned, there were a lot of devil's advocates, but there was no stronger advocacy either. You had each other's backs, and once a decision was made, you moved on.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the conclusions out of this exercise that you went through. You came up with 5, and let's just take them one by one. So number 1 was move the rock. What does that mean?
One of the things that we saw, and whether it was a hospital, whether it was a wealth management firm, whether it was a supermarket, we saw that organizations shifted in that we're so used to managing multiple priorities, and some of them are predictable and others aren't predictable. And we found that people were really becoming either overwhelmed by it, or they were picking the wrong one. Something that was shiny and felt, it could show up on the Today Show, and all of a sudden everybody was gravitating to it, as opposed to a few of the organizations that we had a chance to work with pulling over to the side of the road for just a minute and saying, what's one thing that we want to do today? What if there were a single most important conversation we need to have as a leadership team, what would that be? And what we started to see when we started the work was that you'd get a group of 12 people together, and of the most important conversations, what's the one most important? There'd be a range of like 8 conversations. But you saw, as they started to get more aligned with what was going on, and they talked about, what are we going to move? If we're moving one rock, you started to see those 8 different conversations start to synergize a bit. And 8 turned into 3, 3 turned into 2. Sometimes got to 1, but you saw people really focused on what do we need to do today to keep the lights on, to keep the stores open, and to keep people healthy.
Is part of that also knowing the difference between strategy and tactics? It's always, I've had lots of conversations with retailers over the years, and they've said, oh, we got 20, 40, 60, 80 strategy imperatives for this year. And I always say, you can't have that. First of all, you can't have that many strategy imperatives. Right. And still be in business.
Right.
You got to know the difference between, pick one strategy and 5 tactics. It seems, because that's actually doable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's hard though, I think, in an organization where you have a lot of high achievers and people with a lot of individual accountability, and there tend to be a lot of quarterbacks, and they're quarterbacking for a greater good organizationally, but they're also quarterbacking for their resources, for their energy, for time, for the right amount of focus. And so I think part of it is how can people not necessarily go up into the bleacher seats and let somebody else quarterback for a while, but how can they stay just off the field and make sure that the right plays are being made? And we just saw a lot of that. A lot of the stuff that was incredibly important and might have been really important a while ago has found a fresh place, but a new place. I was talking to some folks a couple of weeks ago about olive cards. And I remember when olive carts were first introduced, and the only thing better than a 20 olive cart was a 30 olive cart, and olive carts were all the rage, and they're awesome. But then you bring a pandemic along, and all of a sudden you can't have olive carts anymore. And what we saw across the board, some organizations that were saying, pull the olive cart out and it's going to collect dust until this is all over. We saw other people saying, well, I guess we can load it up with an old Hickory Farms gift set or something like that. And we saw still other organizations saying, how do we do something signature with this, package things in a way that that speaks to our strategy, speaks to our brand. And that's, to your point before, I don't think that will go away. I think Olive Carts in that organization will go away. But what came out of it, the thinking that they undertook to improve in the middle of the crisis, is something that will be long lasting for them. Yeah. And they're probably selling a hell of a lot more olives.
It's probably true. Number 2, let your leaders lead.
Yeah, I think there's this goes back to my history as well. I think it starts with a belief that people are going to want to show up and do a good job. No, very few people show up at work saying, what havoc can I wreak today? And so you start out with that belief that people want to do a good job. They want to make a valued contribution. And then you start to employ whatever kind of measures you need to make sure that everybody's safe and productive. And I think some organizations are really, you need to have procedures. You can't have, do whatever you want with the grinder or the slicer or the baler. You need to have really strict adherence to those types of things, and you should be measuring and monitoring them. But what we saw fade away was this whole idea of committees and subcommittees, and the governance of getting something done took 15 steps before, and 11 of those steps could be eliminated. You think of how a part-time supermarket clerk is hired, and the amount of discussion and analysis and assessment and everything that goes into that. Is there a way that you can tighten that up? Probably not in a pre-pandemic world, but if you don't have enough people, you find ways to say, do we really, really, really need to have the person meet 3 of their peers before we, teach them the PLU so they can ring produce up.
Yeah. I do think that, I don't know if you've read the Reed Hastings book, but the whole premise of that book is you hire well, pay well, and get out of their way.
Yeah.
And my favorite, one of my favorite exchanges in the book is when the person he's co-wrote the book with says in the book, when we started this project, I said to him, Reed, are you going to have time to do this? And his basic reaction was, I don't have that much to do on a day-to-day basis. It's not like I have a ton of decisions that I have to make every day. That's their job. I'm here for the big stuff. I'm here to create context. And that's like the other thing they talk a lot about in the book is the difference between leading by control or leading by context. You can control everybody, but if you create the context that everybody knows what the goals are, you don't have to control them.
Yeah. We see that too. We see, so much of the management about, just telling people the why, and it's only going to get you compliance. If you can tell people about the what, telling people about the what. Right. If you only tell them about the what, you're going to get compliance. If you can tell them about the how and the why, and not micromanaging it, but particularly the why, what's the purpose of us doing this? Then you get a very, very different level of commitment. Hodge was a wonderful champion of that. I remember being assigned different initiatives from him, and I would ask him, what do you need? Or he would ask me, what do I need? What do you need from me? And I would say, I'm not sure. And he would say, what I'm going to give you is I'll take care of the speed bumps. I'll take care of the potholes. Let me know when you see them. I'll get up ahead of them and take care of that. And I'm really he cleared the way for stuff in a way that very few leaders know how.
Great lesson, and really important now coming out of a pandemic, because there are still speed bumps and potholes out there. We don't know what they are.
Exactly.
Number 3 was to look up and look ahead. I guess to look partially at speed bumps and potholes.
Yeah. The fear, I think, is that it's that old adage about if everybody's focused on keeping the lights on today, who's going to make sure that the lights are on tomorrow? And so it's people that are not only fueling the energy for what happens beyond the pandemic or COVID, but what are the tools that they're going to need once they get to that point? It's that if you need to be able to show, for people to want to belong in an organization, you need to be able to show them a picture of what the desired future looks like. And the desired future hopefully isn't a pandemic. So you need to get out beyond that. You need to be able to show them what that Camelot looks like. And the belief, once again, you've heard this 100 times. if you can show them that picture of a desirable future, they're most willing to go through any swamp or snowstorm to get there. And it's creating that picture, I think. So having not everybody look ahead, but having some people that are out ahead of it saying, here's what we need to be next and next. It's that whole idea of when we've talked to a lot of people about the new normal, and in a really good conversation, it was, we don't think there is a new normal. It's just a next normal and a next normal and a next normal. And I was caught by, you've probably seen those YouTube clips of like the thousands of birds that are flying in formation, and they kind of all go this way, then they all shift really quickly this way. It's that kind of, how do you align yourself really quickly to get through this? And then what's the trajectory once you get beyond it?
Yeah, so much of everything we've talked about so far, it seems to me, involves people feeling invested, feeling a sense of ownership in the business. But that's incredibly important for leaders to feel like those people are being invested in, right? I think it's hard to get, if people don't feel like their hopes and dreams and their desire to do better is being invested in, then they're not going to feel invested in the business. And that's when things get dragged down.
Well, it is. It's the, and I think organizations have, to differing degrees, whether it's hospitals, whether it's an automotive company, whether it's an Olympic team hopefully going to Tokyo next July. It's the whole idea of, what's the point? What is the point of us doing what we're doing, and how is it different? And if people lose sight of that, of the why we're doing what we're doing, then people that have a lot of passion are going to become really frustrated because they don't have traction. And people that are more process oriented aren't going to be able to benefit from that because they're not going to know what they're moving toward. So I think that idea of giving anybody at any level a sense as to why do we do what we do.
Yeah. Your fourth point is to encourage empathy, which I think that's something that probably the pandemic has taught a lot of organizations, that even organizations where they, it was like, hey, we're going to pay you, we're going to pay you. Yep. You're going to do your job, and we're all good here. It seems to me the notion of essentialness, if that's a word, has taught organizations that they really do need to be empathetic towards those workers. Although what worries me about it is that everybody got raises for 6 months, and then they took away the raises, and which to me suggested at least the implication of diminished empathy, if not actually diminished empathy.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is probably creates the most kind of optimism and uncertainty for me, because I'm wondering how much of this empathy that people are experiencing right now is episodic, and how much of it is going to hopefully become ingrained in an organization. Because I think there's an empathy, first of all, it's the understand the word is the first thing. Empathy is probably the most touted word right now in a lot of conversations that we have. And empathy doesn't mean to, feel bad about something or feel sorry for something. Empathy is really being able to kind of walk in somebody's shoes. And there's a conceptual, emotional part of empathy. There's also a practical part of empathy. I remember doing some culture work at the first time in supermarkets, and I hadn't spent any time in the deli. And I'm a big food person, so I tend to be like quarter pound of this, because I like the variety of stuff. I'll never do that again. I swore that day after I experimented working in a deli, because that was the first time that I realized the practical empathy of every transaction starts with, what can I get you? And then there are literally 50 steps.
Right.
Of doing this. You pull it out, you unwrap it, you put it on the slicer, you gear the slicer, you put the safety down. There's a lot of steps to that. And the last step is always, can I do that again for you? And I realized at that point in time, it's like, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of deli people that should rule the world because of the precision and the dance that they create to make that look so effortless. So there's a practical empathy. I will never not be appreciative of somebody that works in a deli because of that 15-minute exercise.
It is so funny that you said that. So we did this, I was at my local Whole Foods, which half mile away. And I was at the deli counter. I needed to get some sliced cheese. So I asked the guy, and he went over to where somebody was and I was looking for a half a pound. And he went over to the slicer where the person was actually slicing that kind of cheese. to pre-pack them, to put them out.
Mm-hmm.
And he started to say, can I just get a half a pound? And I said, well, wait a minute. Is she already slicing that kind of cheese? And he said, yeah. I said, well, how big are those packages? He said, well, they're about a pound. I said, give me one of those. Don't reinvent the wheel. I'll take that.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been a pandemic, I think he would have jumped over the counter and hugged me,
Yeah.
because it was just going to be trouble. And it was like, I wasn't doing it to be empathetic. I was just trying to make his life easier.
Yeah, exactly. I think
Definition of empathy.
Yeah, they're those little vignettes that are very, very day to day, that just tweak your humanity up just a little bit, that don't make it any more difficult for you, and they make it a hell of a lot easier for somebody else. So yay,
I do think it's funny, though. It's interesting. Organizationally, empathy can be at that level, but it also can be on a bigger level. And I think to how this year the Business Roundtable came out and said, well, we're no longer going to, our organizations are not going to work not to put our shareholders first, but our stakeholders first. And then, of course, I can't remember, I think it was the Washington Post came out with a long article saying, well, yeah, it was a nice thing to say, but you didn't really, a lot of you did not do what you said you were going to do. It's still early, but I have to admit that I have a little bit less faith in humanity than perhaps I should, because I read that and I said, yeah, you're going to say it, but getting there is going to be a long, long trip. And the first time you have a bad quarter,
yeah,
or you make a decision that's not approved of by your shareholders, I'm not sure you're going to stick with it, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's that classic definition of trust, though, that I think where that sense of big time benevolence is going to make sense. That if I believe that you're competent day to day, if I believe that you're ethical, and that if I believe that you have a sense of for a greater good, then people will believe. If they're organizations that you're writing a check so that you get some good press, yeah. I think a lot of people, and I think the pandemic has turned up people's awareness of that. They know when somebody's blowing smoke at them versus when somebody is really seeking to do something good.
It's a different conversation. Always think this is where Amazon gets complicated, because there are ways in which they are doing so much that's really positive, and then they got their labor issues, and and they're paying people not a lot of money while Jeff Bezos's numbers go off the charts, and it is a complicated picture, and they're not perfect. And I think because they were very much, even though they were created in the mid 90s, people think of them as being very much a 21st century company, and they expect more. And I think that's both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah,
people expect more of you. It's like Apple. Yeah. People expect more of Apple, and when they don't deliver on empathy or whatever it happens to be, people are disappointed.
Yeah, well, they're not only expecting something bigger, but they're expecting something more magnificent.
Yeah,
right. More ingenious, more streamlined, more. It touches you in a way that you've never experienced a sense of the greater good.
Changed my life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not going to change my life. Why am I doing business with you? Which is, by the way, a great mantra for any business, right?
Yeah.
Figure out how am I going to change people, change the way I feel, change the way I think, change the way I live. These are all the things that I would think a great business would do.
Yeah.
And finally, and I think this is really valuable for especially coming out of the year that we just had, stand still for a second.
Yeah, I think it goes back to taking a breath. I think growing up in supermarkets, there's such a passion for action, and there's so many pulls all the time, that the idea of pulling people together or stopping for a second and just kind of checking the map, I think makes a lot of sense. Where have we been? How long did it take us to get here? Are there things that we need to put in our backpack that we need to resupply? Are there things that have just been weighing us down that we can let go of? Like, some organizations will come out of the chute and just try to find whatever normal is for them, and we'll let it happen to them. It's that old, kind of the change 101. Change either happens to you, you impose change on other people, or you're included in change. And I think if people could pull over to the side of the road, figuratively, and have that conversation about what change happened to us that we want to take advantage of, what change did we invent or redeploy that we had to take off the shelf but is very vital to us now, and are there things that we haven't even thought of yet? And I think I'm not talking about weeks-long immersions, but it goes to the point where we sent those cards out. it's a 10-minute conversation with people. It doesn't have to be, you know, whiteboards around a room and chairs in a circle. You know, who do you like to think with, and where are we now, and where do we want to go? And it also gives people a chance to take a breath, because I think the level, you know, when you're overusing the word fatigue, there's probably something that needs to be addressed.
Well, that's true, and I think we're all tired of using the word fatigue.
Yeah, there's an issue with that. You know, if unprecedented and fatigued are the two words that will go down in 2020 as the most frequently used words, we probably have something we should pause and think about. You know, I saw today though, the most often used term in 2020 will be "you're on mute." So I guess unprecedented and fatigued will have to find a place in the silver or bronze medal categories.
Or in the case of certain people, they should have been on mute and they weren't, which is that's a bigger problem. So
that's the exploration coming out of this, is is there a way that you can voluntarily employ mute from time to time? So.
Steve Campbell, this has been great. If people want to reach out to you at Provoke, how do they do that?
Campbell at provoke.co. And you can, our website is provoke.co as well. So you can either look for me, email, or on the website. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter and all of that stuff too. So look for some orange and some antlers in the middle of it.
Here you go. Well, listen, thank you again. Happy New Year. I hope that for you, 21 is a better year than 20, and that we're all back out on the road and doing the things we love to do sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Kevin. It means a lot, and thank you for the rudder that you provide the industry too. It's in a year of a lot of choppy water. It was wonderful to hear your voice and to hear some of the stories that you told.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. We'll see you soon.
You bet. Take care.